So with that, I will turn it over to our first speakers from Merck and the University of Michigan. Oliver?
Yes, thank you for your invitation and organization. Today, I will first talk and then Wes will follow our topic with the title Ontology for Process Chemistry, Giving Context to Instrument Data Structured by the Allotrope Data Model. This is a collaborative project between Merck, like Wes Schafer and Zach Dunn, and me from University of Michigan, and then Anna Dunn from GSK. Next. So we all know knowledge management projects need structured data. So if the data is incomplete, ambiguous, or alternatively labeled, or redundant, or missing, or inaccurate, or irrelevant, when the data comes in for machine learning or AI or data mining, eventually we are going to get a garbage. So it's more like a garbage in and garbage out. So we do need to have structured data. And next. And then ontology terms provide entry-level standardization. For example, now we have 3 terms, right? We have different IDs. They look like similar, but however, we label the category differently. We say, oh, it's lot or batch or lot ID. Really here we mean the same thing. So we can say, oh yeah, they are all batch identifier. The major thing is like we need to have text definition. It's more like for human, and then we need a semantic definition. And this one is really for machine to understand. So here we can have a semantic definition. Say it's an identifier, and then it has some role for the batch, and then the computer can understand, and then we can do some more machine learning and data mining. Next. And then why the context is important. Now we have a lot of analytical data, but however, if you only have data, it may not be enough. It's incomplete because the data has to be bound with experimental conditions, right, and workflow details. And then you combine them and make sure they are seamlessly bound, and then not only for human to understand, but also for computer to understand. Now we can see it's complete data. And we need some language to do so, and then we propose ontology can be such a language. Next. And then in the field of process chemistry, there are different data sources, right? And we can say, oh, there are data sources about process chemistry, and also analytical data, and enterprise data, and external data. And those data, they often are separate, but we want to make sure the data are interoperable. So ontology can provide a basis for the interoperability between data resources. And also it can provide a reasoning for improved querying and analysis. Next. So the goal of the work is 2 parts. So basically we want to answer 2 questions. The first question is, how do we maximize our use of existing data to inform the design of new process chemistry studies in order to avoid or reduce unnecessary or uninformative studies? And the second question is, how do we best structure the data to optimize data aggregation, facilitate rapid analysis, and enable effective data mining and decision making? So the first question is about design. Second question is about data and data analysis. Next. So to address this, we like to propose something we call the OPC. It's Ontology of Process Chemistry. So last October, we presented a work with a title called Extending the Allotrope Foundation Ontology an ontological representation and analysis of process chemistry at that time by Wes and me. And for Allotrope, initially we don't get immediate use cases, but we do in the end, we form some small group with some more immediate use cases move forward. And then we have more people. We have Anna from GSK and Zach join our group. And then we also kind of formally name our ontology as OPC, Ontology of Process Chemistry. And the next, Wes is going to give some more details about the OPC. Yeah, Wes, please.
Thanks, Oliver. Let's take a minute to discuss the domain that we're talking about here. For those not familiar with process chemistry, it concerns the development and optimization of the production processes for chemical compounds. So that's the scaling up of laboratory chemical reactions into commercially viable synthetic routes. The key objectives for process chemistry are product quality, process robustness, economics, environmental sustainability, regulatory compliance, and safety. It's integral to any chemical product development, but it's especially well developed in the pharmaceutical industry. It can be organized into 4 phases: route scouting, which is determining what is possible and what reaction scheme is likely to give the best results. Route optimization or process optimization, optimizing the reaction parameters like temperature, how reagents are added, and how fast, what's the best solvent, things like that. Process validation, which is a formal process of proving that the selected synthetic route meets all regulatory requirements. And finally, process maintenance, which involves addressing unforeseen manufacturing problems, satisfying new regulatory requirements, and implementing new technologies when they make sense. So as you can imagine, defined workflows have been developed to meet these objectives. We're not going to go through all of the workflows that are listed here, but we're going to show one example on fade and purge studies. So in short, the ontology of process chemistry is meant to provide the context for the standardized analytical data provided by Allotrope for the process chemistry workflows. So in terms of the analytical data available for reaction, there are a couple of things that one would notice. The first is that the chemist speaks a different language than the instruments. In many cases, the LC has no idea that the area percent for a particular run represents the percent conversion of the reaction. The chemists supply this interpretation, and generally it's recorded in the laboratory notebook, not in the chromatography system. For those familiar with the Allotrope and BFO patterns, it's connecting the actual analytical result to the quality that it represents. The second thing to notice is the amount of testing and the understanding of that testing increases throughout the project development. Initially, relatively little testing may be done in the discovery space, with more and more being done as the project moves towards clinical trials and hopefully eventually manufacturing. I'm just waiting for it to go forward. Whoops.
Sorry, I had an internet hiccup. So yeah, I'll go back. Sorry, I had my internet paused for a second. Is this where you were?
Yes, thank you. So the same is true for the metadata associated with the reaction itself. Initially, the data is very limited, and then you collect more and more as the project progresses. In reviewing what was available in the existing ontologies in the process chemistry space, we discovered that there was little or no coverage for equipment and safety concepts, in addition to the workflows that we discussed earlier. Yeah, okay, great. So here I'd just like to take a minute to discuss a data structuring gap analysis that was done at Merck in the process chemistry space with the current systems. I'm sure these systems are shared, across the industry as well, some of them. And this was done as pre-work to standardizing data from our process chemistry workflows. So the first thing that came out was that the actual chemical reaction itself was covered reasonably well. The data capture of non-reacting species could have been better, and there were some missing roles in the ontologies, but in general, you could, the metadata around a chemical reaction was structured very well. That was not true for purifications, though. In our case, it was mostly free-form text. Waste streams were not explicitly defined, and the ontologies were missing key concepts for fate and purge and yield. Sampling was in basically the same thing. Again, it was mostly free-form text, and exactly what was sampled could be quite ambiguous at times. And so the hope is that this, by developing this ontology, will provide a basis for structuring data specific to process chemistry. Additional work was also done by Oliver at the University of Michigan to assess what already exists in terms of ontologies. And here are the top 5 that were found. The RxNO ontology is a comprehensive list of chemical reactions, but it doesn't address reaction metadata at all. CHMO is a fairly comprehensive ontology that Allotrope itself has leveraged many times, but it's focused on the analytical scale and does not address process chemistry workflows. Chubby covers chemical properties, but not chemical reactions. The Pistoia UDM project was very interested in describing reactions, but again, it doesn't address process chemistry workflows. And finally, the ANSI ISA 88 industry standard controlled vocabulary was focused on batch processing or on manufacturing, and it doesn't really describe development activities. And finally, it's not really an ontology. So the conclusion was that no ontology is completely covering the process chemistry space, that there were significant gaps, and so we'd probably have to do some work. So how did we go about developing the OPC to address these gaps? First, we wanted to use extensible ontology development. What that means is that we reuse terms from other ontologies, we align the ontology to other ontologies, we follow design patterns. In our case, we followed the Obo Foundry ontology development principles, and we followed the Allotrope Foundation ontology style guide. We used both the up-down and the bottom-up design. So up-down, we aligned ourselves with the basic formal ontology, just like Allotrope and the Obo Foundry. And from the bottom up, we identified common operations, a basic reaction pattern that was implied already by the Allotrope data model. And then we focused on use cases based on the workflows that we talked before. So in short, OPC is meant to cover the entire life cycle from route scouting to filing. So now as an example, we'll talk about 2 things that are near and dear to a process chemist's heart, yield and purity. 2 of the most important goals in process chemistry are to maximize purity and to maximize yield. Unfortunately, they're often opposing goals, as shown here. The small yellow arrow represents the amount of impurity that remains with the product, and then the small blue arrow represents the product that's lost to the waste stream. It's the nature of purifications that some of the product is lost with the undesired impurities, and that some undesired impurities get carried forward in the product stream. It's therefore not surprising that process chemists have metrics to track this, and 2 of those are purge factor and yield. So the purge factor is simply the ratio of an impurity in the waste stream to that retained in the product stream. So obviously the larger that number, the better, because more of it's going out through the waste and less is staying with the product. And yield is similarly a ratio of the amount of material that you're able to get out of the process in ratio to what you actually put in. So we modeled both of these calculations to make sure that they could be represented in terms of the ontology. This slide is just a setup to show the fate and purge use case that was investigated by our team. It also shows how complicated and bifurcated the data associated with process chemistry experiments can be. This is the last step in a synthetic route for dorvarine. It involves the alkylation of one of the nitrogen species and the crystallization of the product. As with most reactions, it's not 100% selective, and it produces the 2 impurities that are shown here. It's further complicated by the fact that there is a reactive impurity in the starting material, which is actually the product from the previous step. And this impurity produces secondary impurities that have to be tracked back against the the impurity from the original, the previous step. And this is to meet regulatory expectations that we understand the fate or final disposition of all process impurities in our synthetic route. Finally, the ontology must be able to describe the presence of these chemical species in the two streams, the product stream and the waste stream. So if we go back to the two goals of the ontology that Oliver introduced before, one of them is how do we maximize the usability of existing information to avoid and reduce the needed experimentation cycles to get to the result. So could we use previous information to reduce the number of experiments we have to do in this purge factor experiment? So in terms of a data reuse, any of the later experiments that were done along these lines were probably explicitly labeled as purge experiments. So crystallization purge experiments to reduce the amount of impurity in the product stream. But earlier experiments probably weren't. They were probably focused on yield or simply the ability to do it. But those experiments still contain a lot of good and applicable information. So how can we get that data to self-report as relevant purge data? So we took example data from the Doravine example before and expressed it in terms from our nascent OPC ontology, in particular the terms for a purge factor. And if you remember, the purge factor is the ratio of the impurity in the waste stream to that in the product stream. Here, the compound with all the zeros and the 1 is the actual one of the impurities in the previous example. And we should also note that the mother liquors are defined in the ontology as being a waste stream role. So the ontology already knows that the mother liquors are waste stream. So in the first query, we queried for just data associated with purge experiments. So experiments that were labeled as purge experiments. And as you can see, it returned concentration values for the impurity in the various streams, the input stream, the product stream, and the waste stream. In the second case, we queried for data that belongs to purge calculations. So that is impurity amounts in both the waste and product streams. And here you can see that a semantic reason query for purge data found the additional experimentation that was actually labeled a crystallization experiment. And then that data could then be used to decide what additional studies needed to be done rather than repeating work that had already been done. The second epic story that we talked about was the ability to automatically aggregate data from our experiments, right? This is a very, very simple example of how the semantic description of a CTA section can be used to help an organization properly aggregate its data. CTA is a regulatory submission document that requires a certain degree of structuring. And so we were able to put that into our ontology. So here, for example, the semantic definition for CTA section 3.2.s.1.1, see, it already sounds like a regulatory document, contains 4 different names for the API. So this can be used to query enterprise data and create a draft of the document. Showing that the ontology can, through its semantic definitions, can provide a roadmap to mine data for submissions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Oliver to conclude.
Yes, thank you, Wes. So this slide shows some sense of how OPC is organized. So OPC includes many branches of turns, and they are all aligned very well together. So here, for example, we have unit operation, synthesis role, quality, information content entity, and the device. Not all terms are OPC specific. We borrowed a lot of terms from other ontologies, and some terms are also OPC specific, and we align them together. Also want to say, not all terms are really for workflows, but they are needed to support how we can study workflows, how we can do data reasoning, inference, and data mining. So yeah, it's very well organized. Next. And the OPC is currently publicly available at the GitHub with the website address here. And you can download the ontology from the GitHub, and you can open in Purge. You need to download the Purge from Stanford website, and you can see it. Alternatively, if you don't want to download the Purge, you can see it in our web project. You need to have a quick login account so you can use it. And for now, our ontology has 300 new terms, and also we have over 700 imported terms. And we have, like Wes has submitted an application to Opal Foundry a few days ago, and Opal Foundry has been very quick and give us very positive feedback overall, and they agree our domain is very good one, and they give some technical questions, and now we are addressing them. Next, we want to do some complete testing of our ontology with the remaining workflows. We want to add additional regulatory and finding terms to our ontology, and we will also add some more static data into our ontology. Next. So in conclusion, we think domain ontologies are important for full understanding of data, and ontologies enable machine reason data discovery in addition to data search. And then we present our ontology of process chemistry and give the rationale and some examples. And now we have it open, and we have submitted to Opal Foundry. Hopefully it can be approved soon, and then we can be part of the members of the Opal family. And also in the end, we like to provide some items for Allotrope consideration. We think data needs to be reviewed and approved with some like data quality attribute, so we can better review the data and give approval in the end. And also we will need some analytical workflows such as stability release, to support the analytical study of the workflows. And then in the end, we think it's a good idea to become a member of the Opal Foundry. So Opal means Open Biological and Biomedical Ontology Foundry. It's a bigger community, and they have showed some interest, actually very good interest to Allotrope, and definitely there is a chance for collaboration and for joining forces. And in the end, we like to acknowledge the support funding from Merck to support our University of Michigan work, including me, to work on the project with Merck and with Allotrope. It's a great honor to be part of the collaborative effort. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Wes and Oliver. Certainly great suggestions that Allotrope will certainly consider your recommendations. So thank you for that. I see one question in the window. If you could address involving the name of OPC and whether or not that might be considered a different name, so it's not confused with OPC UA.
Yeah, we have tried to, definitely it's something we can consider. We have tried to play with different names about the ontology. We have been thinking about the PCO. So but PCO has been taken by another Opal ontology. And of course, we welcome feedback. We can consider later.
Great, thank you.
There are two questions.
Go.
How are the ontologies populated, and then which reasoner has been used for reasoning?
I can answer. I don't know. Wes can follow. We use the Hermit reasoner. I think for the populated for the term population, we have using the as Wes mentioned. We use the so-called XOD, extensible ontology development procedure. Basically, it's top-down and bottom-up. For top-down, basically, we think, okay, look for the process chemistry and identify what's needed at, at a high level to covering the field, right? The process chemistry. And then you can basically identify many terms in the domain, and then trying to align with even higher level, right? Like the buffer, the basic formal ontology, and other things. So this is kind of high level design. So we can populate a lot of terms, using this way, and then we can do the bottom up one. Then we have our own specific use cases. I mean, you cannot achieve all the things at once, but then we focus on use cases. Then we can be, have good, depth, for the use cases studies.
And if the question was more like, how are the definitions defined, we got a lot of them from, if they were regulatory involved, we get a lot of them from ICH. We get a lot of them from review articles, some from textbooks, quite a bit from Wikipedia. Frankly, there's a good section on process chemistry in Wikipedia.
Okay. And I trust, Wes, that all those attributions are part of the ontology, correct? For folks who want to check. Okay, great. So Jamie, any other questions? Otherwise, I think we need to move on.
Oh, we're good.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Wes and Oliver.